All right, and we're live, episode number 86 of the Before the Trainwreck series, the only show on the internet that helps you not make a train wreck out of your damn life. I'm joined today with a lawyer by the name of Andrew Esquire. Welcome, brother.
Pleased to be here, guys. Hope I can help with some good information on marriage or not getting married.
Yeah, you've got a really good presentation on some cold hard truth bombs around living with women, marrying women, some of the risks that come with that, all from a factual experience based, perspective. I know that you expose yourself to a lot of guys and women in the legal profession, so I've seen you kind of rip through this great presentation you did with Myron, so I wanted to bring you on my channel, expose you to my audience, and share the same sort of stories and experiences with the guys watching. So without any further ado, let's kind of just jump into it. I mean, I'll probably hop in from time to time and maybe chime in a little bit, but I want to make this about you and, kind of run these points and tips that you have here for everybody. So smash the like button, guys, if you're just hopping in, and I'm going to grab the link. So if you're watching this like on Twitter or on Facebook or somewhere, do me a favor, click that YouTube link, head over to YouTube, helps me out a ton with the algorithms. Andrew.
Yeah, so let me start with the disclaimer because I'm a lawyer and I got to have it up front, and I'm going to do it once and that's it. I'll tell you to look at the beginning, but I'm not a family lawyer. I'm just a lawyer who knows other lawyers, who's heard a lot about family law, done some of my own research. But obviously, the law varies wildly from place to place. Like where Rich is in Canada, for example, the law about prenups, much different than the US, where I'm at in Florida. So obviously, if you have a real issue and you need some help, go to a local lawyer who specializes in family law, divorce. Probably if you're a guy, might want to go to a guy lawyer. But you want to make sure you go to a specialist in that field. But I'm going to give you some information and facts that I've heard about that. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because I've spent years helping people and also seeing people who just need basic information. A lot of times as a lawyer, we get super specific. And, Rich, when you were doing your, debt business, did most people have very advanced questions, or was it like usually very basic problems and basic issues?
In my debt business, most people can't spell debt. They spell it D-E-P-T. So it's very rudimentary stuff.
Yeah. So that's what I'm seeing too. Exactly the same thing. Most people have rudimentary questions, basic issues, and I'm just trying to help people out with basic information and basic issues, because a lot of times that arms you to be able to come to a lawyer if you need to and ask those specific questions and really get the help that you're looking for. So I'm going to just start out with some basic facts, and then I'll see if like those sound right to you or don't sound right to you. So Rich, if I told you that the marriage rate was at a historic low, would you be surprised?
Not at all. Especially if you've been watching my channel. Hopefully these guys have smartened up, but yeah, not at all.
And that's my question is like, do you think it's because guys are smartening up, or just women are less interested, or what do you think's behind that a little bit? I want to hear that from you just off the top.
I think it's probably women are a lot less interested than men smartening up, because all day long there's a lineup of guys Googling away, their lives, how to find a wife, how to find mother stock, stuff like that. I think there's a lot more women that are earning professional degrees, earning professional levels of income, that are finding it hard to marry up, because that's what they do. Because of hypergamy, they tend to marry across the socioeconomic scale and up. So, I mean, if you're a female doctor, lawyer, accountant, blah, 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 you're going to have a harder time finding a successful guy that's willing to, take on the burden of that professional.
Yeah, and that's what the data is saying too. One of the crazy facts I learned is 20% of people, I believe it's 25 and older, have never been married. And that's like pretty insane. It's grown, I believe, about 10%. Now there's a gender gap. So Rich, which gender do you think is more likely to have never been married?
Which gender is more likely to have never been married?
Never been married.
I'm going to say dudes, men.
Yep. That's the one that's grown, and the gap is growing between men and women. So more men are just never being married. So it's actually like 23% of men and 17% of women. So that's where that's going. Now, I will say the one trend that's interesting, and maybe this is a Kevin Samuels question or something, but it's racial lines divided with white, black, and Latino. white and Latino tend to be around the 20%, but the Black community is much higher. I believe it's around 40% have never been married. So that's a much higher statistic. Go ahead.
Why does marriage and the stats around marriage interest you? Like, this is not your area of practice, right?
And here's the thing. I see everybody, and I was helping college students. I worked in a college clinic, and people would come in with questions on getting out of their leases, getting out of rent, but they would come with a lot of girlfriend questions and a lot of marriage questions. And even lawyers I know. I went to, I believe, 13 weddings in 11 months after law school. And you know how many have prenups, Rich?
How many? None.
2. and you know which ones had the prenups?
Tell me.
The women that had money.
Oh, the women that brought the prenups to the table because they didn't want to lose their shit.
Yes, the women had the prenups. One of them was an heir to a very wealthy, famous in Florida grocery chain. The other one had a prior business, so she had significant assets. So both of them brought the prenups to the table. But even lawyers, even my friends, are not really understanding marriage, understanding the risks, really thinking about it. And even my brother, this is like a confession, but he's getting married, and I've told him the risks, and he really didn't think about it. So that's why it's really passionate for me, and it's one of the easy things that people need to understand. And the risks are so high nowadays, legally and practically, that people need to understand these numbers. So that's what fascinated me about it personally. And
How
I
old
think
are you right now?
So I'm 34.
Is marriage something that you'd consider, or?
Well, there was a day where I thought it was something I wanted to do. But then I, dated, I went to law school. I had certain relationships that enlightened me to certain facts. And I said, you know what? This is not something I want to tie myself to. If, I'm in a situation where I really need to get out or it goes downhill, it's now become incredibly hard. And I'm looking at least 6 months, maybe a year and a half before the end of the process for divorce. It's very unlikely that it would be amicable or something that I'm easily agreeing to. It probably would be something hostile, especially since the girls I was dating, a lot of them were lawyers. So they're going to...
is never the same woman you marry.
Exactly. And they're going to be pressing it hard. And here's the thing that made me really passionate, Rich. Here's what made me passionate is that I see guys are behind the curve.
Oh yeah. They're definitely well behind the curve when it comes to this knowledge.
Women know so much about this. They know about child support. They know about alimony. They know about prenups. They know about everything.
Women, in my experience from the guys that I've coached, they spend a lot more time planning the untying of the knot. Probably as much time planning the untying of the knot as they do tying the knot, with the invitations and the doilies and the chair covers and how many meals we're going to bring out and all that sort of stuff. Guys just kind of march into the slaughterhouse with they just sleepwalk into it. Right?
I take it like a snap decision. You make a snap decision to get in and a snap decision to get out without
what could possibly go wrong? If it doesn't work out, we'll just get divorced, right?
Exactly. And that's what they're saying. They're saying, oh yeah, it's just marriage. People do it, right? That's normal.
Yeah.
No. So, and the other thing is the girls, I think I've heard this, they're, spending probably 6 months thinking about it before they're taking the action, and they're probably going to a lawyer. And if you have a real issue, you should go to a lawyer before, instead of doing it and then having to backtrack, having to think, oh, should I have done something differently? And I'm not going to get into children, but obviously if there's children involved, that just ups the level of scrutiny and ups the need for real legal counsel.
Two things here. I mean, the first thing I want to ask you is, what is the origin of marriage? Are you familiar with that story?
Yeah, I'm sort of familiar. Love? No, it was always political, right? Historically, these things were for political unions, right? Back in the, English common law, these were really meant to tie estates together to make sure that, in agricultural society that, the wife was taken care of. She wasn't left, on the streets without some sort of, compensation, because she wasn't working. She wasn't able to obtain an income. And concepts like common law emerged because, and if you see the states where they still exist or where they're still in the books, a lot of them were frontier states. So they were out in the middle of nowhere where there's no judge, there's no, court system or government, and people would just live together on a farm and, never solidify it. So they said, okay, we need some process because the woman needs to be able to take this when her husband dies of dysentery on the Oregon Trail. You're going to need somebody to take that over.
Yeah, there's a really good book by this author. Her name's Stephanie Coots, and she wrote a book called Marriage: A History.
Cool.
And she basically collected court records, personal diaries, like every piece of data that she could throughout history as far back as was available. And it really boils down to this: the whole point of marriage has never been about love; it's always been about the acquisition of in-laws.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's a huge benefit if you think about it, especially back in the day when you're thinking about, business, linking lands, making connections. That was really how things were done traditionally. But
there was no state interference. If you wanted to untie the knot and get rid of your wife, you just send her off, and you'd probably keep the kids and everything she brought to the table. Right.
And there usually had to be a good reason to annul a marriage, especially if you're in a Catholic country where it wasn't really supported unless there was like a crazy reason. So, I mean, you needed some fault. Now we're in a no fault situation. Even my mother, when I asked her, there I see a no fault question.
There's a question about no fault right there.
He predicted it.
Timed.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Could Andrew talk about NoFault Divorce and maybe the history and how it changed over time? Cheers and thanks for the content. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that changed in the benefit of during the sexual revolution because, before you had to have some sort of reason. So infidelity would have been a reason. And even like I said, when I talked to my mother, she said, well, if your wife cheats, then that's reason for divorce. I said, Mom, we don't need that anymore. You may be thinking way back, but that doesn't exist. You can get divorced because you feel like it. It's no fault. Mm-hmm. So, and there are a couple states that have this weird thing called covenant marriage, which limits the reasons to kind of pre-sexual revolution where there has to be infidelity or some other major issue, domestic violence.
This is at fault divorce, because there was a guy that I had on last week that basically had a private investigator follow around his wife, collected data on who she was banging, basically, and took a lot of evidence, and there's a lot of drugs that were involved as well too. But long story short, because of the fault process that he used, he ended up getting full custody. She pays him money, and like it was just a total win for him, like the whole thing. But you guys,
that's crazy.
The last episode, it's number 85.
You have to watch that. You have to figure out the situation, and you got to know that situation may not apply where you live and may not apply to your situation. So even if you've hired that private investigator, even if you catch her in the act and you've got the bag of cocaine, you may not still be able to do anything in terms of alimony or that. Maybe it'll apply to child support payments. Obviously, if there's drug involved or drug related activities, that's going to impact any custody. But that's a separate issue.
Let me ask you this question before you get started. Because I keep thinking about this. Would you advise guys before they were to get married to spend 3 hours in a family courtroom and to spend at least an hour on a lawyer's time to find out exactly what he's walking into?
Rich, I could not agree more. I think the problem with a lot of guys is that they're cheap, and men are, thrifty. We're cheap. We're the, more efficient sex. But, I think what happens is that you don't spend the ounce of prevention, and then you've got to spend like the 20 tons of cure. It's so great to have that advice up front to know what you're getting into. Not just forget a prenup. Even if you're not going to do a prenup, so you should still go in and talk to a lawyer about it. And also, like you said, see the court system, look up what's going to happen. Just, do a little bit of research, like basic research on the consequences or your state laws. A lot of them are written easily so you can actually understand them. And even a lot of firms have explanations on the firm website that give you basic information about the law in your state. So absolutely worth it.
Absolutely. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, talking about why people get married, I've always read one economic theory of marriage, which I thought was interesting, which is people get married when times are good and they get divorced when times are bad, which I think is kind of what we're seeing here. So, if you look at what's to come, I imagine there's going to be a lot more, divorces ahead, because obviously we're in for economic tough times with the continuing lockdowns, the businesses being shut down. That doesn't spell well for a lot of small businesses and a lot of guys that are related to those industries. And, you're seeing an increasing number of, women, once they get divorced, competing for a smaller and smaller percentage of what they find as economically viable individuals. But if you are in that category, you definitely need to spend the money and time, because you've spent so much money and time on collecting those resources, and then you're just not going to protect them. It's like buying a Lambo and not taking out insurance. Why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
So, and especially if you got a business too, a lot of people don't realize that, if she can come off as contributing to that business or leading to that business success, that can, in a lot of states and jurisdictions, be factored in. So, I'm not saying it's going to be Mackenzie Bezos situation, but it could be something that's, fairly serious. So once again, it's worth
this example. I mean, if you take a look at the list of the top female billionaires, the vast majority of them had actually acquired their wealth through divorce. Meaning
yes,
they took half their husband's shit.
And, that just shows you the power of divorce law. And, right. It increases over time, especially if you stay married. So that's why it's important to get this information and get it out there. And I'm trying to get information to younger guys, because I know there's a lot of older guys who know this because they've been through it. They're like, I've seen it. I've been married once. It's not for me.
It's a good refresher. I mean, there's always older guys that are in their 40s. They're like, hey, Rich, I'm thinking about, getting an LTR, maybe living with her and getting married again. It's like, dude, this is going to be number 3. Sit down, shut up, and pay attention for the next hour. Andrew's talking.
Yeah. And the thing is, guys, you got to realize living with her can be just as bad as marriage. Exactly. I mean, forget common law. There's so much with cohabitation, so much in terms of economic risk. There's domestic violence risk, because if she's living with you, that counts as a domestic situation, not just as a, potential assault battery. And DV is dealt much more strictly. A lot of places there's mandatory arrest, which means if the police are called, they have to take somebody away, or they're strongly encouraged to. And it benefits the police to take them away, because then they're not liable if the guy or girl, whatever, if there's any violence afterwards. Right. Some states have found the police liable if they leave someone there. So they'll take somebody, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the guy. Unless there's like clear and convincing evidence that the woman did something, it's going to probably be the guy. So just remember, guys, when I'm talking about marriage, like, it also applies to living with a girl, even if common law doesn't apply in the state where you live. And as a note, I have a whole video on common law, but it only applies in about 8 jurisdictions in the United States. So the majority of states don't follow common law marriage, which quick definition is a type of marriage where you become married if you live together and hold yourself out as husband and wife for a certain period of time, but that's in a minority of states.
And I did a video in the last 20 series. It was a cold hard truth video, but I think it was something like the 90th richest family in Canada. This guy didn't actually live with this woman.
Oh, I heard about that one.
Yeah, and he ended up being on the hook paying for maintenance to her as if they were married. And he figured, well, we're not living together, I'm off the hook. But because he flew her down every weekend in the wintertime to his condo down in Miami, and he spent the summers at his cottage up in Lake Muskoka. There's 7 days in a week. If you're spending 4 to 7 days with your girlfriend and her kids in tow, guess what, bud? You're basically married. It doesn't matter if you had the ceremony, exchange rings, said I do. The state is going to enforce family law whenever they can. In Canada, common law is more common than it's not. So not like the US. I think Quebec's the only province where common law is not enforced, but the rest of the Canadian provinces and territories, common. But check with a lawyer.
See, that's a great example. That's a huge difference. So, if you're definitely in Canada, I mean, even other states, let's say between Florida and Georgia, we can differ in how, let's say, you determine alimony, even if otherwise our laws are exactly the same. Shout out to Jonathan Noble. I know you've had him on your
he's great
podcast, but he's telling me that he practiced in, I think, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and there's differences even between those states, even they follow generally the same legal principles. So you just really have to understand that and consult with a specialist.
It looks like it's 3 years in Ontario.
Oof. And the thing I remember with that news article is he did other stuff. So I think people were saying, oh, he like fake proposed to her and this doesn't really apply. But
He put the family through counseling sessions because his girlfriend wasn't getting along with his oldest daughter. I mean, why would you do that if you're not living like a married couple, right? Like he basically did everything that he could to demonstrate that he was married, even though he didn't go through the ceremony.
And people brush it off because of that. They say, oh, he did all that stuff. I'm not going to do that. But you got to understand the law is evolving and law changes. It's not static. And the family law judges have a lot of discretion. So you think they're going to move in a more conservative way or a more liberal way? I'll let you guess.
I'm going to share a quick story, and this is the one that I wanted to talk to you about before we went live. So
sure,
this is relevant at this point for this reason. So I get together, with my family lawyer usually a couple times a year. Love the guy. He's brilliant. He's smart to talk to. When we're offline having lunch, those are the great conversations that you can have with a family lawyer. And I was just asking, so how's practice going? How's business going? And he's basically indicating, look, I don't really want to do this much longer. I'm kind of getting fed up with this nonsense. I'm like, well, what's going on? And he shares a story about how this guy basically, got divorced about, I think he said 13 years ago. The kids were real small. There was 3 of them. And then she basically pissed off and she was partying. She was riding the carousel, going from one guy to the other, dude to dude, boyfriends back to back to back. And at some point, because he stayed in the matrimonial home, they had to liquidate the asset and she wanted to take her half. Fine, fair. There's nothing wrong with that. So of course, they get lawyers involved and, he starts his position from, yeah, that's fine. We have to liquidate the asset, but we need to talk about child support that hasn't been paid for the last 13 years while she was running around. Right. Mm-hmm. And the judge was basically, no, we don't. We're just going to pass on that.
Yeah.
Now, had it been a guy that was running around and hadn't paid child support for 13 years, family law would have enforced it immediately. It would have been the first topic of conversation, but because it was a woman that was running around that wasn't paying child support, judge was like, I don't think we're going to deal with this. We're just going to set this aside.
And I would just say, I like to think about things very, very simply. Have you heard the term deadbeat dad?
You never hear the term deadbeat mom, but
boom, there you go.
Here's the truth. And this is one of the stats I put in my book, was that women are far less likely to pay child support when it's enforced upon them than what fathers are.
Yeah, and that just goes to say, which direction do you think it's moving? Because you hear about one, you don't hear about the other. I actually used I talked about stand your ground. This sounds totally unrelated, but gun laws and marriage. I mean, maybe you need a gun if you're in a marriage, but the point is that most people think, for example, those gun laws only apply in very conservative states. But what they don't understand is they've been actually adopted by case law and even in liberal states like California. But because the media, because the news pushes these issues, pushes these terms, pushes the perception, you don't really understand the truth and you don't understand the reality. And that's why I'm trying to explain what the reality is and what the facts and statistics are. And once again, I know you've heard the term half of all marriages end in divorce, right? Mm-hmm. It's down a bit because less people are getting married. So right. It's down to 45%. Okay, you can probably approximate the 50%, right? But it's still very high, and I think the U.S. is the 5th highest in the world. It's behind like Luxembourg, Spain, France, and Russia. But once again, the statistics on second and third marriages still on point. 60% of second marriages end in divorce and 75% of third marriages end in divorce. So if a woman's been married before, the red flag needs to be going off. Yeah, the risk profile needs to go up. And what I want people to understand is the risk. I know people are going to go out there and do it anyways, but at least understand the risk. If you're going to do something that is risky, take preventative measures. That's what I'm about. And that's why I try to teach people my mindset and how a lawyer thinks, because you know what? We're guys, we're going to take risks. This is an extreme risk. If you're going to do it, at least come in armed, at least know what you're doing, and then you'll focus and be able to target those risks and how you can mitigate them. And another interesting thing, which I brought up on Myron's show, is that the developing countries are actually experiencing the biggest spike in divorce rates. So as you see them industrializing and there's being a shift in society, like a 1960s, 70s-esque shift, what happened in the West is happening over there, India, China, they're seeing the highest spike proportionally in divorce rates. So I think China and Turkey were like super high, like 400%. So, I think this is something that's not going to be isolated to the United States. You're going to see it even in supposedly traditional countries as they industrialize, become more modern, and they also bring their law in comport with law in Western countries. Because that's kind of part of the system is that, they try to normalize their laws with the West, because the West is known for rule of law. That's why, the dollar has strength. People trust in our economy. Our stock market is because of our legal system, and that it actually means something. It's not super corrupt, and it's been proven. So that's why other countries are following in suit. So even if you live in another country, you should probably be aware of these trends, and the marriage trend should be concerning, even if you live in a country where you think the marriage law is a little bit better, because it probably will shift. So still, you should talk about it.
It's not going to stay better. It's going to shift to crap, basically, at some point.
To no good. And look, I would be telling this stuff to women if it was impacting them, but it's impacting men. I mean, that's the reality is, if there was a wealthy woman, in fact, I'll say my aunt, she pays my uncle alimony, but that's because she was part of my family business. He ended up getting disabled. They started equal. He ended up getting disabled. She ended up becoming extremely profitable. But that's a minority of cases. And I would be lying if I said it was 50-50, because it's not.
No, it's not even close, but it does happen to women, yeah.
So would you be surprised if I said the median age for marriage has moved up?
No, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because people are waiting till later.
Yeah, so
degrees, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think it is for females and males? Let me ask you that.
I'm going to say for females, it's around the epiphany age, 29, 28, 30.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And what about guys?
Early 30s, 33, 34.
So the median age is 30, 31 for guys. It's about 28 for females. So you nailed it.
Okay.
And that's going up. So that's been ticking up over the years, and that's on a steady, uptrend. So a little bit of statistics about divorce and once people get married, what they do. So this is both Pew Research and some of it's CDC data. But 30 years old is the average age when couples divorce. And that's because there's kind of a split. There's a lot of younger people who get married and divorce pretty quickly. And then there's people that are older that get married and divorce. So I think that's how that comes out as the median. That doesn't mean exactly that's when people get divorced. But that's, just the average. And then usually people contemplate divorce for 2 years before they file it. And knowing that women are usually filing, you can put 2 + 2 together. Mm-hmm. So they've probably thought about it and likely consulted a lawyer before they filed. So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. They're actually thinking about this. Yeah. Average length of a first marriage, 8 years. So, and you got to understand there's a lot of triggers. And at 8 years, you're pretty high in the alimony ranking. Once you pass 5 years in most states, in the United States, consult a local lawyer, but 8 years is typically enough to get a significant alimony payment. And now, alimony can be for a certain period of time. It can be permanent. It just depends on your state, but it's possible that could be for a very long period of time, maybe a decade, or if not permanent under certain state law.
There was a study done, so speaking about 8 years, there was a study done with a whole bunch of LTR couples, inclusive of marriage, long-term relationships, living together, but they were basically all coupled up. And the average length of time was 8.39 years of each relationship. I want you to take a guess. What percentage of couples do you think were still living in a state of bliss and obsession with one another?
Oh, after 8 years?
Yeah.
Less than 25%.
Less than 3%. I think it was like 2.39%. And the percentage of couples in that 8.39 year period that were still indicating that they still loved each other. So not bliss or obsession, kind of like a notch lower, but they were still in love with one another. What do you think the percentage for that was?
And why do you think that is, Rich? Because I have some ideas, but I want to hear you say, why do you think, that's the perception and that's how it comes off?
Yeah. But first you got to answer the question. Love. What's the percentage that you think that we're still in love?
In love?
Yeah.
Like 1% then. I mean, come on. If they're,
it's a notch lower than obsession, with one another. So
okay, fine. I'll give you 5%.
Okay. It was actually closer to 12%.
Okay.
Right. So, I mean, if you were to take 100 couples that were together for 8.39 years, only less than 3% are obsessed with one another, and less than 13 are basically head over heels in love still.
But that's because we're treating love ahistorically. We're coming up with this narrative that love is something that people did romantically and they stayed in romance forever. I don't think that's ever been historically a real thing that we've documented, that people can say, oh, we're just as in love at 80 years old as we is in 25. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't transfer into something else, like, you know, some sort of, you know, companionship, and there's not some sort of, you know, bond for that. I think there's something to be said for long-term bonding that's mutually beneficial. But the feeling you're going to have when you're 20, you know, is not the same feeling you're going to have when you're 60. And just think about that in relation reality. Any guys who are out there are 30 or 40 can just tell you they're not thinking the same way as when they're 18.
I would fully agree with you. Like, I don't think that things, you know, when it comes to love and obsession have changed that much over time. I mean, I wouldn't know for sure because I don't know if there's a study that was done, you know, 500 years ago or not. But based on the data that Stephanie Kuntz has in her book, it basically tells me that nobody really married for love. They just married for the acquisition of assets, in-laws, and to raise children.
Yeah, it's just a lack of data, right? If that was something people married for, where are the sources, where are the sites, show me the data. Or
well, we
show
have
me
Disney movies. There's, you know, there's entire catalog of Disney movies that say that
and those are clearly historical. They're very
right?
historically accurate.
Yeah, very, very historically accurate.
Yes, yes.
Seven Dwarves and the Snow Whites of the world, man. It's all true. I'm telling you.
Is that movie even allowed anymore? I feel like that's banned now.
Probably politically correct or racist or something.
Yeah, it's going to be corrected. Like the dwarves are going to be like slightly below average height. Yeah. You know.
Sorry, carry on.
No. It's good. It's good because, you know, I just love hearing, you know, these concepts, because once again, like you said, we're still using these laws that applied to marriages that were really not romantic marriages. We're still using the laws that applied to, you know, the practicality of marriage, sort of the business marriage, the political marriage, these types of marriages. We're still using the common law that's 200, 300, 400 years old. It needs to be updated. Just like you'd update laws that applied to like horses and buggies don't apply to cars. It's different. We're using different law. That's why the internet's having so many issues right now, and the law is changing wildly. For example, they're just trying to, you know, pass a law relating to how they deal with copyright online, because, you know, honestly, dealing with the use of memes on the internet is different than dealing with a published book.
Right.
It's just dealt with differently. So, you know, the law's very slow to catch up. Historically, across all areas of the law lags because it takes time for a case to be raised, go through the judicial process, have the precedent set. That could take 6 to 10 years, and by then the technology completely changed. You might not even have the same technology. We're not using you know, VHS tapes anymore, but we were in the 90s. So. You know, and I tell people, like, some cases, for example, the World Trade Center case, about the liability over that took like a decade to settle.
That sounds about right.
ExxonMobil, the Exxon Valdez spill, that took like 2 decades. And you know, that's not that unrealistic for a giant case that's setting huge precedent. So, you know, don't be surprised for that. And don't be surprised that it may take that long for marriage laws to update. So don't count on marriage laws changing while you're married. Even if they do, by some magical way, change in a positive way, it's going to take a long time, guys. So don't count on that.
Yeah.
And, you know, let's talk about, you know, in terms of modern stuff, what percentage of divorces do you think are caused by online affairs or online activity?
What percentage?
Yeah, it's a percentage, because they report like what was the reason you were divorced, and, you know, they're reporting whether it's online, you know, affairs or not.
Well, I'm going to say it's pretty high up there. It's going to be one of the top 3, right?
Yeah, it's 33%. It's like roughly 1/3.
Okay.
So approximately 1/3. So I mean, that's a huge percentage. I understand, like, there's, you know, a million reasons why you get divorced, and online activity is 1/3. And this was from data from about 6 years ago. So that was like before Instagram and all this other stuff, where that's just gone, you know, in overdrive. Especially, you know, I'm here in Miami, you know, it's insane. You know, and I think that's only going to push it higher and higher, where to the point where it's almost 50% plus, you know, in some way, shape, or form, even if they're not admitting it, that had something to do with it. It might have facilitated it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a
you find out your girl's doing OnlyFans.
You know, there's a problem with self-reporting. It kind of ties into cuckoldry. It's like, you know, when women will self-report, you know, that they've cucked a guy, then it relies on her, you know, basically disparaging herself publicly on a poll.
That's not good.
They tend to avoid stuff like that. So yeah, you're not going to get the honest answer out of that.
Yeah, that's a problem with all self-reporting, is that, you know, people just inherently aren't honest and they don't know how it's going to be used or whether it's going to come back. So, you know, we have some data that's self-reported, but we do have some factors that have been stated that decrease the likelihood of divorce. So you could reach that in the inverse, saying if they don't have that, it's increased.
Okay.
So number one, you could probably guess. Rich, do you think having your parents happily married helps or hurts your chance of divorce?
That's going to help.
Yeah, exactly. That's a major one. And that's actually the biggest one statistically. It's about 15%. Lower chance if their parents are happily married. And honestly, I think it's probably even higher because frankly, you know, when I've talked to people just generally with parents that are married, especially for a long period of time, they've seen that as a model, and they've seen that their parents aren't in this like passionate love that, you know, that they think they should be in. They're in like a stable companionship where there's mutual benefits, or at least an understanding between them. If they're married for like 40 or 50 years, I mean, that's clearly
I always
something.
tell guys to look at the parents' relationship, but more specifically, the dynamic of the relationship. Like, does she treat him like a plow horse and browbeat him all day long and call him useless? Because if that's going on, you can pretty much expect that that's what you're going to invite into your own marriage.
Yeah, and what's their male model? How are they perceiving men in their life?
Right.
You know, and what frame or utility are they looking at a man? Are they just saying, okay, he's the wallet? You know, I've heard some of the responses to like you know, any insults that might be levied against women is for the woman to respond, okay, wallet, you know, as a just derogatory term. But the point of the matter is, yeah, if someone perceives you as, you know, just useful for your money, that's obviously problematic. And, you know, there's one that was surprising to me that I saw, which is if your parents, or rather, if you attend college, you're less likely to divorce. I'm thinking this may be outdated data from perhaps when more men than women, because it was 6 years ago, and the statistics have flipped. So I kind of want to see the longitudinal data like 5 or 10 years from now. I think what it applies to is there's also a statistic that if your income is over 25K, you're less likely to be divorced. So essentially saying if you have economic means, you're less likely to be divorced, which I would agree with. And generally college is correlated with economic means.
Well, the state will pay a woman more than $25,000 a year, you know, to support her and her kids than what a guy would. I mean, if a guy's making $25,000, she's just going to look at it like, well, I don't need him because Big Daddy State will give me that much money, if not more.
Yeah, I don't know what the conversion rate is into Canada bucks, but I mean, 25K is not a lot anywhere. No, I don't think it'd be a lot in Canada.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously, here's another one. If you do not cohabitate or marry before 23%, or sorry, before you're 23 years old, you're less likely to divorce.
Yeah.
So, you know, we see a lot of these like young marriages.
I find that bizarre because I've seen that one as well, and it's true for North America, but it's the opposite in Europe. If you live together before you get married, you've got a higher chance of a long-term marriage versus in North America.
And I would really need to understand that. I know Europe is culturally a little different. I know that a lot of people cohabitate over there. Maybe the laws are different.
Well, European marriages are a lot different than North American because the standard, like if you get into Esther Perel's stuff, because I mean she deals a lot with infidelity, is like the standard is declared monogamy and then covert adultery.
Like in France, it's like very, very known
in the US, but in France, Spain, you know, Greece, Italy, like all the Mediterranean sort of areas, it's like, yeah, if you're just home by 8 o'clock, I don't care who you're banging, just, you know, don't take her anywhere that's going to embarrass me sort of thing. Like that's their model over there. Which
is almost like, I want to say almost more traditional in a way. Like, you know, you've got the wife and then you've got the mistress, like kind of the king would have like the queen and then the concubines. Like that was, there's like official concubines and it was like known that you were going to go visit them. You just didn't make a big deal about it. You didn't take them to the ball. Right. You know, you just went over there. And is it like that in Quebec? Because I know that's like French Canadian.
I believe Quebec is like Europe, if I'm not mistaken, because it's a very francophone type of culture. It's more European than any other place in Canada.
Okay. And then here's the last one I had for decrease the likelihood is if you have a baby right away. And I assume that's because most of the time when there's a divorce and a child involved, it'll be around age 7, 8, or after they're a little bit older, they get out of high school. So those are the 2 times you see spikes. So I assume you're just saying, okay, I'm in for 7 years with this kid and then I'll, move on. And by then you've really ticked up the alimony counter. So you're in for it.
Works out well on both sides.
Exactly. So, I talked on my own show and I'll get into it here. There's certain, other arrangements. I've already talked about common law, so I'm not going to go into that. But one thing you got to understand is when I say marriage, I'm usually talking about traditional marriage, which requires a filing of a license. Sometimes it requires blood work to make sure you're not related, usually a certificate before a judge, something that makes it official.
Let me ask you this question. Yeah. Private marriages are a strategy that some wise guys think will prevent family law from imposing its stronghold on your life if you need to leave or untie the knot. What's your view on a private marriage? So you basically get married, but you don't have a marriage certificate or you don't go to the church ceremony or anything like that.
So yeah, no, and that's not a legal term, just to be clear, because some people say, oh, we have private marriage in the state. And I go, well, it's not really a thing. As far as I know, I haven't found it in Florida, so maybe that's something somewhere else. But, I understand the concept, right? It's pretty much cohabitating, calling each other married, but not actually getting married. Well, first of all, when you cohabitate, you're probably commingling your finances. Mm-hmm. If you're doing that, you're going to have to go through a, disgorgement process, let's say. And that's going to be very similar to breaking up a business or splitting other assets, which is going to go through the court system and take a long time and be very expensive. And there'll be a lot of the same considerations. For example, if the wife can say, oh, I supported him by doing certain services at home or taking care of the kids while he built the business, she may be entitled, depending on your state law, to some of those business assets. So you should be aware of that. The other thing too is, in a lot of states, we've seen plaintiffs' lawyers getting creative. And California invented the term palimony. Have you heard of that one?
Palimony. What is that?
So essentially it was people in California who lived together. They were just pals living together.
Oh, okay.
And the attorney attempted to sue on the basis of getting alimony for them living together for an extended period of time. It was a girlfriend. They, were like unofficially together. California does not have common law marriage, so it wouldn't have applied there. And it failed. But what you're seeing is a trend of people trying for it. And when you see that, eventually it just takes one. And you don't want to be the first one who's getting nailed for this unique support. But as more people adopt unconventional marriages, we're seeing people coming in and asking questions about polyamory, how that applies. That's becoming something more popular, especially with like millennials and zennials. I've heard people talking about polyamory. As these things come up, the law will adjust. The law hasn't caught up yet, but I guarantee you it will adjust and it will start accounting for that. I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know that my Canadian viewers will appreciate this illustration I'm going to provide. You probably won't get it so much being in beautiful Miami, but whenever you go to the pond, in the wintertime, you see kids throwing rocks on the ice. And they keep throwing rocks on the ice until it breaks. And then there's the one fat kid that's got a little more muscle on him. He throws a little bit more of a boulder onto the ice and it goes through. That's the exact thing that you're talking about. People are going to keep testing law until they get something passed through, and then pretty soon it becomes case law. Yep.
And a lot of people say, oh, well, I'll just do a religious marriage. And I'm not like Muslim or anything. I've had people say, oh, well, you can do an Islamic marriage. And, that's just the thing. But it won't be long before the state says, okay, well, you've held yourself out in this religious ceremony. Even if you didn't go get the official paperwork, we're going to deem you as a marriage and make you obligated. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of time, guys. So once again, make it very clear. You can actually, in most states, have a cohabitation agreement, where if you're going to live with somebody, you make them sign a cohabitation agreement, which lays out the terms, lays out the processes. You may be able to get around like eviction to say, okay, like in the, situation where we've terminated this, you're going to move out. So once again, talk to a lawyer before you do that, because it's so, it could be a couple $100 for you, of legal time. And you're going to save thousands. You're going to have your time. You're going to save your money, and that's going to really prevent you from getting in a bad situation. Of course, you won't be in that if you spend that time up front, do the research, and also take precautions. Like if you have a partner and they're living somewhere else in another house, that's going to prevent you from a lot of those cohabitation risks.
Correct.
So that's what I would say. I mean, a lot of people are going to do it anyways. And once again, if you're going to do it, just know.
Did you ever see that meme about the red flag box?
No. What is it?
It's a picture of a cardboard box with red flags in it, like parked on a bench by like a football stadium for some kids or something like that. And then the caption beneath it is, "You've read what's in the box, you know what's in the box, but you date it anyways for 8 months."
Well, Rich, have you ever been to Europe?
Yeah.
Have you seen the cigarette packages there?
Yeah.
They're way worse. They're like, you will die. Like straight up, and some of them had photos for a while. Like they're horrible. Like compared to American ones, they're all over, and they have a way higher smoking rate. People do it anyways.
Yeah.
So that just shows you people can be warned. You can tell them. I can get up and down on my lawyer's soapbox and yell, and only so many people are going to listen. Yeah. I just hope if this helps, like 2 guys think about it and at least go to the lawyer or do some research, I'm happy. And now I'm going to go on to prenups because, I love talking about prenups. But, I think a lot of people, they come up with these sayings like prenups aren't worth the paper they're written on, or they're worthless.
The common MGTOW trope is they're like toilet paper, basically.
Yeah. And that's true because most people are cheap and they're getting like the 25-cent one online or the free one.
LegalZoom doesn't work for 25 cents?
Oh, no. Oh, yeah. LegalZoom is just fine. No, that's a lie. It's a joke because you have to tailor it to your specific circumstances in your specific state. Maybe that's a template you can start with, but then you take it to a lawyer and say, okay, I've filled in some blanks and go from here. And then maybe you're using his time effectively and he'll bill you less. But and by the way, if you're ever consulting with anybody or using a bit of time, you get to consult with Rich Cooper. It would help to use his time efficiently in yours if you have your questions ready, if you're organized. Whenever you're dealing with a consultant or a lawyer, be a little bit organized. That can help. But you're not going to get value out of it. If you put 25 cents into it, you're going to get a 25-cent result.
Yeah, you're basically getting your toilet paper there.
And look, if you have no assets, if you're a loser and you have just like a PS5, that's your only asset. Like you don't need to worry too much about a prenup because you don't got anything worth taking, right? But if you have assets, if you're part of like the 1%, you need to put time and money into that. If you were thinking about it, if you're like, okay, I'm going to do it anyways, so I'm not going to listen. Put the time in.
What do you tell guys when they present the notion of a prenup? It's Kevin, who's the VP of the sales team, and he makes $250,000 a year, and he meets Becky, the hairdresser, who's making $30,000 a year, and Becky says to Kevin, "But Kevin, prenups aren't romantic, and we're never going to get divorced anyway, so why do we even need this piece of paper?"
I said that's all the more reason why you should need that piece of paper, because the people that object the most are the people that you need it for the most. Because if it's a situation where it's equal, most of the time they have no issue with it. If you brought it up to a person who has got equal assets, and I've talked to people who have equal assets, and like, for example, lawyers getting married, and I think the reason why some of them didn't get it is because they were starting in like the same job. Like they were both working for like similar firms making, $70,000 a year, which, by the way, guys, not all lawyers are rich. Some of them make very mediocre salaries. Not me, but most lawyers. But you got to understand that, sometimes when you're equal, you don't perceive the need for it. But what you got to understand is you can, wildly change. You could shift careers, shift jobs, and especially if one of them is going to end up staying home. So, for example, if you want children, which frankly is the primary reason and one of the main reasons why I think people get married, or, the situation where it trends towards the, desire versus completely useless, is when you're going to get children involved. And if you're going to get children involved, you got to understand who's going to take care of them. Is it going to be Becky, or is it going to be Kevin in sales? I think it's going to be Becky.
I'm pretty sure Kevin's not giving up his $250,000 a year job to stay at home and play Mr. Mom, is he?
If he doesn't want to get divorced. So, yeah. And, a lot of times you say, hey, let's find people that are equally yoked, but that's so difficult nowadays. And there's been a lot of data, a lot of studies. I think The Guardian put out an article on how, women are finding men economically unattractive.
Mhm.
And within that, they're including people who are at a rough parity. So, and while that's not everybody, I think that's becoming increasingly common. You've seen an uptick in the use of, sugar sites and all this other stuff because people are looking up. They're not, or at least women are looking up. And therefore it just makes it all that more important to protect your assets.
Yeah, it's messed up because women are looking up. So you get a lawyer that works, law firm, let's say, and she's making $125,000 a year. She's looking for a guy that's making at least that. The problem is the guy that's making at least that minimum. Yeah, exactly. The guy that's making at least that, probably more, is not particularly interested in a woman that's rushing to get married at 34, whose eggs are drying up and they're at the end of their reproductive cycle, because he's in his, sexual marketplace peak in his late 30s, and he's probably looking at 20-something-year-olds that are way hotter.
It depends, Rich.
Browbeat him.
I mean, it depends, Rich, because a lot of people, nowadays they're just getting with the first thing that comes their way. Just because of the lack of, information out there. And, a lot of people take dating so cavalierly. But you're right. If he's out there on the market and he's actively marketing himself, as a lawyer, and I may or may not know this from personal experience, I will neither confirm nor deny, but I'm saying you're getting a lot of, inbound demand. So, you're looking at all that and you're saying, okay, do I want to be with the lawyer who works all the time, who's going to have no time to go out and date? We're not going to get to spend time together. Or do I want to be with the, even secretary or paralegal who's much more free and, who's much more usually amenable? That's something that, at that level, you have those options.
Yeah. You want some peace in your life.
Exactly. You don't want to be, you don't want hostility. I tell people, if I was going on a date, I said the last thing I'm going to do when I come home is argue.
Right.
I do it for work. I don't want to come home and have to litigate.
Yeah.
I want to come home to tranquility, not a courtroom.
Yeah, you guys are going to have to look out for a video in the future on why you shouldn't date lawyers.
Yeah.
I got a top list for you.
Yeah. That'll be very interesting. I'll watch that one, Rich. But yeah, so about prenups, just real quick. One thing important, and obviously it varies, but you should always be honest about your assets. If you hide assets or, say you don't have something or don't include it, it could invalidate the prenup potentially.
What happens if you lose your ledger wallet in a boating accident and it's at the bottom of the lake?
Is that like a dog ate my homework situation, or?
It happens, a boat sink. You could have had your ledger wallet in your pocket with all your crypto, and
I won't comment on crypto, but all I'm saying is crypto is actually getting a lot more legal scrutiny.
Of course.
And it's getting looked at a lot more closely. Obviously, it's being regulated, and you'd be surprised based on what you're using to buy your crypto, how much that's tracked, especially if you're in the US. The restrictions are getting pretty tight. So people who think it's okay, it's totally anonymous. The IRS has no idea. I have friends who work at the IRS, and I'll just say it's not entirely the case. Yeah. So especially if you have significant assets, you should probably be honest about them. And tax laws is something very specific. But other important facts about a prenup that might invalidate it is, in a lot of places, you have to have it really in advance of the wedding. Like sometimes like 30 days, 60 days. There's a lot of them have been invalidated because they're under duress, quote unquote, because they're given it at the wedding or the day before the wedding. Can't do that. Can't say, oh, no, you know what? Now I want a prenup. If you do, you're going to have to push the wedding back.
Yeah, generally speaking, you want to get the prenup out, I think, before you get the invites out.
Yeah, that's a great standard. Great standard.
I have a question here for you, Andrew. It says, what's your opening on trusts or shell corps? Sounds shady, but basically laundering your own hard-earned clean money to hide out.
I take issue with the word laundering because that's what we call a crime in America. It's kind of illegal, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm just going to say, don't launder your money, but if you can legally minimize your taxes, tax minimization is legal, and I would encourage that. And I would encourage you to talk to a lawyer, or actually usually you can get bang for your buck if you go to an accountant, and then just go for the lawyer for the stuff you actually need him for, the very highly complicated stuff. But honestly, an accountant often gets you a better rate. Like my billable hour rate would be much higher, even though I don't have one right now, but it would be much higher than an accountant. So a lot of times the accountant's done this before. They've even set up businesses so they can advise you on what's more specific. A trust can be efficient depending on what you're trying to do. If you're thinking about end of life and passing it on to your heirs and assigns, a trust might be efficient. Otherwise, maybe something like an LLC or an LLC set up as an S corp might be useful. So just consult with a lawyer on that. But definitely minimizing your taxes is something you want to do. Not evading, minimizing.
Yeah. Well, there's always gravity, because when boats sink, they put the boats down to the bottom along with the ledger. Gravity just works that way. It's got nothing to do with.
You're just a big boater, Rich, Is that the same lake where the fat kid threw the rock in the ice?
Yes, exactly. Same lake. Yes.
So, okay. Now, two more last things about prenups. You got to have separate legal counsel. So, if you've got a lawyer, she's got to have a lawyer that looks at it.
You guys call it ILA in the States?
ILA, I've never heard of that. Oh, independent legal counsel,
well, independent legal advice. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, and that makes sense. That's a good term. I don't say it, but I say a lot of weird stuff. So I'm from Miami. It's weird. And then obviously you've got to have fair and reasonable terms. If you write in something ridiculous, it's not going to be enforced. And also writing in anything about the kids is probably not going to be enforced. So if you say, no matter what, I'm not paying for the kids, that's not going to be enforced. They're just going to strike. Yeah,
and you can't put in the prenup agreement that we're going to have default 50-50 custody.
Yeah, you can't also put it like things that aren't going to be enforced, like like sexual stuff, like we're gonna
Wednesday night is blowjob night.
I'm trying to be PC, Rich. I'm like engaging coitus once a week.
Thursday we're going down the Hershey Highway, sweetheart.
Twice per annum. You can't do that. That's not going to be enforced.
There's a hall pass.
The other one's the weight one. Like you can't gain weight. That's not going to be enforced, guys.
Yeah, it's not enforceable, right?
No. And like I said, the biggest issue is that people try to do it themselves. They don't talk with a lawyer. And you got to remember, a lot of states, there's formalities, like just like with a deed or like a deed. You wouldn't sign a deed like without the proper formalities, like witnesses need to be notarized, might need to be recorded. You've got to really check where you live. And, that's something super important.
What do you think about postnups?
Postnups. Now, honestly, I haven't heard as much about that. So
I've heard the notion.
Is that a Canada thing?
No, I've heard the notion a couple times from guys in the US that had a prenup sign prior to when the invitations went out. And then after the nuptials, after the I do's, then they had a postnup sign to reaffirm the terms of the prenup.
So what I have noticed, especially with different jurisdictions, like I believe in Canada, I believe this is right because you've spoken to family lawyers there, obviously, Rich. Yeah. I believe you have to refresh the prenup.
Well, yeah. I mean, if circumstances change, like let's say you get married, you have a couple of kids, by year 5, she's a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
Well, circumstances have changed now. So how do you deal with the assets that you were going to take with you if you had to untie the knot? I mean, ideally, you want her back to work at some point if you got to untie the knot and in a position that earns income as close to your income as possible. But you don't always have those options. And also, you also have a problem of, well, honey, we've got, 5 years between the I do's and today, and we have 2 kids and you've been a stay-at-home mom. And I'd really like you to sign this piece of paper that says you still don't get my shit, even though you stayed home and raised my children.
That's the issue, right? It's because it's going to be hard pressed for somebody to agree to a postnup after they've, already in it, that pretty much affirms that they're in a worse position. Yeah. If they get ILA, they're probably going to say, don't sign this. But if there's a change in circumstance, just like you said, if there's a change in circumstance, especially a major one, you may want to relook at it and try to refresh it. And then at least if they turn it down, you can say you tried. And if you have a prenup, you can at least stand on that. So you can say, look, I stood on that. I made the attempt. That's the best you can do. I'm not going to say it's going to completely mitigate your risk. I'm just going to say it's the best you can do.
Basically, the way that it was explained to me is you have to look at a prenup like it's written with what do you call it? Not invisible ink, but ink that starts to disappear over time. So the longer it sits on the shelf doing nothing, the less visible the intent of the prenuptial agreement becomes. It's almost like the ink is just disappearing over time. So if you're going to break up or you want to untie the knot, do it closer to the date when you sign the prenup than later.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, in different jurisdictions, different because obviously Florida, like I said, it's not required. It isn't something that like the case law strongly supports refreshing it. But if it's a jurisdiction that definitely leans towards that, definitely. And if you can do it, because once again, that's going to be more evidence. That's going to be more factors. And these courts are taking the totality of the circumstances into effect. So at least it can show that as part of the procedure, you tried. So it's always good.
Consult with a lawyer in your state or province before.
Yes, because like you can hear me caveating this, and that's because it's so different. Like, and when I was talking with Jonathan, we were talking about differences between Pennsylvania and Florida. It's much different, even though we follow the same principle for alimony. So there's two general principles: common community property and equitable distribution. So community property is like pretty much 50-50. So everything is split 50-50 pretty much. That's a lot of liberal states, California, etc. Alaska, you can elect to go that way if you want to. And then the other theory is equitable distribution, where the court just looks what's fair and reasonable and, tries to come up with an equitable split, which can end up worse than 50-50, but oftentimes it doesn't. So, they would look at stuff like, how long you were married, what your property constitutes, what was separate before, what you brought in, and in a way that can make it a longer process, which is why having a prenup can shorten that process. And obviously, if you can get an agreement, you can sit down and have an agreement laid out at the end of the marriage and say, look, just sign this paper and we're done. That would help. But even if you're ready to go and you say, hey, I've got this all signed out, sign the paper, let's go, it's no conflict. Some states that can take 6 months. So understand it's not going to be like a light bulb.
Right. Question for you. Are you planning on having kids?
Well, Rich, that's a very personal question.
If so, like under what circumstances would you be able to facilitate that at a lower risk?
So look, not right now. I'm going to say not right now. Now, I reserve the right to change my mind. And, as a guy, we have a longer window. And it's something that I could see myself in the future doing, but not right now. And if I did, I would think very thoughtfully about how I did it. Clearly, I would consult a lawyer wherever I was. And I also have to think, would I want to have kids in the United States? That's another issue, especially as a guy with means. One of the things, if you're part of the 1%, is you can move. And, you can move within the United States, or you can move outside of the United States to another country if you're up in an upper echelon. One thing I tell people, which surprises them, is, Rich, have you heard about investor visas?
Investor visas, like at a 30,000 foot altitude. Yeah.
Yeah. So like most countries have some form of visa where if you invest a certain amount in that country, they give you automatic citizenship or permanent residency.
Yeah, you can do that throughout much of the Caribbean, right?
Yeah, no, everywhere, almost everywhere. Okay. So Belgium is pretty low. I think they're about $300,000. The U.S. is about $1 million. Some will say will take $500,000. But almost every country has a certain amount that if you're really well off, you're really part of that like 0.1%, you've been successful, you've been working on your business, you've been improving yourself, you've been making yourself the best person you can turn around and say, hey, look, I'm going to move my business here. I'm investing in this business, give me citizenship. And part of that analysis, if you're thinking about having kids, should be, is this a favorable place for me to raise a family? And just even if you're moving within the United States, just think about that area, think about what their family law is. Like I said, a lot of this is on the internet. You can just find it. So
yeah, it's going to take some Googling, but the information is definitely out there.
It's out there. And if you want to have kids, it's worth it, because think about the time, the investment, how long you're keyed into that, 18 to 20 years.
I don't understand how hostile family law is towards men, and they think they just kind of go into it and they'll just have the kids and everything will be fine. But the big selling point to having children is to have your name passed on and to be able to influence, the raising of that child. And men have no idea how badly family law interferes in that, and how the way family law is written, that it actually encourages women to behave badly so that they become the custodial caregiver, so that they have primary, parenting rights over you. And a lot of men end up seeing their financial resources transferred to their ex-wife while she uses that money to alienate them from their own children.
And I guess the unfortunate thing is many people have kids at a time in their life when they're, late teens, early 20s, when they're, making the riskiest decisions without thinking. So especially if you've made it this far, if you've survived into your 30s, congratulations. And, you're now at a point where you're not, so full of, hormonal drive that you can think rationally, you can think strategically. And just like you plan with your business, you can plan with how you'd have kids.
Here's a good question from Ben. He says, I get the prenup argument but for most people I see getting married don't have high earning jobs. Curious about mitigating risk for lower earners.
Well, that's what we talked about, right? Yeah. Lower earners have an inherently higher risk. And even if you make a little bit of money, it's worth going to see a lawyer or at least doing the research. At least do the research, okay? I really think you should see an attorney, but even if you're a low earner, do the research. And I think, if you're a low earner, you can consider, is this really the right time to get married? The answer is it's probably not. Not in 2020. Look up the cost of raising kids. Look up the cost of childcare. Look at the cost of preschool. Look at the cost of all that's related with kids. It's astronomical in the U.S. and you will be paying for that. And if you're not paying, you're going to be going to jail. So just understand that this is very important. And I think low income earners almost have more risk because they're not going to get out of it. It's not something like, for example, credit card debt that you're very familiar with that is a little bit harder to pursue. Your wages can be garnished, and there are deeper penalties than just, your credit score being hit.
Johnny Bravo, who's going to comb his hair really, really fast. So how risky is it to marry a woman who's pressed? That's got to be a joke.
That's a troll. So yeah, I'm not going to answer that. That's like, come on, man.
That's like looking at a meat grinder, knowing it's a meat grinder, and then putting your penis in the meat grinder and turning it on. You're really just inviting a lot of pain and turmoil into your life. Don't do it.
But we appreciate the 199 British pounds.
Yes, thank you.
That makes you laugh. But yeah, no, obviously think about the alimony laws because that's very important. You want to really think about that. But generally it's going to look at the length of the marriage, how long it lasted, and what the circumstances are. I got some like basic facts, but if you're talking especially over 10 years, you're looking at significant damage. So
there's I think Andrew's right. There's a lot. I mean, there's a different kind of risk, but there's a lot greater risk in some senses if you're a lower income earner. I mean, you don't have access to some of the better some of the better tools and resources like moving to another state or moving to another country or buying an investor visa or paying for a top shelf lawyer to help you craft a proper prenup and a postnup if you're going to do that. I mean, if you're the guy driving the UPS van, I don't know what they make, but let's say that you're the average guy driving like the UPS van and you meet Becky, who's a hairdresser, and Becky passed on Kevin, from the $250,000 a year sales guy, and you guys pair up. You've still got, the other problems that still exist to the wealthier guy. It's just, you have fewer tools and resources available to you. I mean, you can go to a Facebook group and see a bunch of single dads, swapping notes and ideas about the shit show that they're living in their lives right now. And most of them are on the lower incomes scale. It's a difficult conversation to have. It's a very long conversation to have. In fact, I mean, the best you can do is really deal with the vetting component of the woman that you're planning to marry.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on, Rich. I mean, you said a lawyer, and see that resonates with me so much because here in Miami, I'm dealing with the people I socialize with are all high value guys. They're high earners. They're fellow people who are very, very well off, and they'll just come to me personally, and I'll talk to them friend to friend because those are the people you socialize with. I'm sure these family lawyers through social connections because you're in circles where these people tend to rotate, so you tend to have a connection with them. You also understand as a business owner the importance of consulting with people and having professionals in your life. Anybody who runs a business understands the importance of an accountant. But if you're just Joe Blow, the plumber, or not even the plumber might have a business. But if you're just working at Walmart, you may not understand that because that's not part of how you live, right? That's not how you function.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go into a complicated merger and acquisition, without a lawyer. And you just understand that inherently. So you're thinking about this with a business mindset. So I think developing that business mindset, developing that 1% mindset, that goes a long way. That's why I talk about a legal mindset, because when you start thinking in a certain way, it changes how you analyze everything.
Is going to jail for an inability to pay for alimony and child support still a thing in the U.S.? Like, is it common in all states?
So let me not speak for all states, because once again, I don't know all states, and I can't speak with authority on it. So, because it's not my area of practice, but I have heard of for child support, and I have heard that the clock keeps ticking. I have heard other family lawyers tell me in Florida that the clock keeps ticking on child support while they're in jail, and I've known them, having issues with that.
So you can't afford to pay something that's imposed upon you, so they take you away from your job, lock you up. You don't have the ability to earn money, and while you're in jail without an ability to earn money, the bill's tallying up. So they're just adding more monthly payments due.
Yeah, I know that inability to pay is usually not an excuse, and it's usually not something that's factored in. It's just, okay, what's the raw number? Now, sometimes with alimony, they will take change in circumstance and readjust it. So, for example, if you went from having $1 million business and then all of a sudden coronavirus hit, because before you're running a cruise company and now there's no cruises, they're going to take that into effect for alimony. But for child support, that tends not to be the case.
I always find it's interesting that men who can't pay for the children get locked up in jail, but women that can't pay for their children just put their hand out and they get money from the state.
Yeah. Well, that's not going anywhere. So
yeah, that's not changing.
It's like, the folks that try to change that law didn't get very far. What was it? Elon or Paul Elon and all them. They tried to, what were they called, Rich? That group, the MRA people.
Oh, what were they called? The honey badgers or whatever?
That was like the female ones. But anyways, the guys who were trying to push for legislative and legal change, that really has been overall ineffective. The laws haven't rolled back.
Yeah. So to that point, because I do get this question often from women. It's like, well, I want to get married. I want to be a feminine woman, Rich. Why do you keep telling guys not to marry us? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, well, we've seen the male MRAs try to affect change, and that didn't work. If you want to have guys wife you up and put a ring on the finger and a bun in the oven, maybe all the girls can get together and march on Capitol Hill and put up some signs saying we want some fairer family laws, so fathers aren't so scared to marry us, and it's less hostile for them if they have to untie the knot. But the truth of the matter is why would they change that? I mean, you've got an advantage on the battlefield. Why would you want to give up your advantage to somebody else? That's why they're not marching on Capitol Hill trying to change family law.
And here's a deeper issue. Why do they want to get married?
Women?
Yeah.
Because they want to have babies and they want shit.
Okay.
They want free stuff from their husband. They want
So the free stuff, that's what I was getting to. But I'm saying, if the reason was have children, that's not a technical prerequisite to having children. You can have children without getting married. In fact, in some countries, I believe like Iceland, it's actually kind of common to have kids without getting married. Like I read that, I saw a small documentary. But the point is, you could have a child without being married. Now, I'm not saying that's not without its risk, but it's still possible. Adding marriage is a layer on top of that.
I know, but a lot of places like here, for example, in Ontario, if you have children together, it doesn't matter if you have a marriage ceremony or not. The state's going to get involved in the untying of the knot because of common law and because family law comes into play when you have children.
So you're saying in Canada, they would treat it like a common law marriage if you have children, even if you've taken no other steps towards holding yourself out as being married?
If you're living together and you have a couple of kids and 5-7 years, goes by, you're basically married.
Okay. So that's a little different. That's a little different than here.
You have to deal with child support, like all that stuff, right?
And that's fascinating to me because, once again, it differs so much. But where's the trend going? I think the trend's going towards that, not the other way.
Yeah, the trend's going towards let's make sure women and children are protected. right? Because men are the disposable sex, women have always been the protected sex, and that's
Well, it's just odd because, they need that less and less, right? Because if they're a larger part of the workforce, if their wages are generally going up, if they're going to college more, they're getting in these very secure jobs, they have health benefits, they're well supported by government relief programs, the need is going down and the law is getting stricter, which is odd. You wouldn't think
that's why I tell guys, if you want to march in the slaughterhouse and get married, fine, but just don't marry too far down, right?
Well, that would mitigate your risk, right?
Yeah.
That would mitigate the risk as much as possible. Once again, some people are going to do it no matter what, but at least get all the steps, take all the precautions you can if you're going to, enter into something that's super risky.
So Johnny Bravo has a follow-up. So his initial was basically
the DV question that I thought was a troll.
Yeah. So putting your Johnson in the meat grinder. So he says, no joke. Let's say your LTR retracted the DV charges because it's your fault. Then you marry her after a few years. How bad can that bite you down the line of the marriage? My view, Johnny Bravo, is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. She's already applied a very hostile form of family law against you, right? She's already shown you who she is. So why would you invite that in? Like, there's billions of other women out there. Like, why would you even invite this in your life? You've already got this, this tombstone in that part of your relationship. I don't know, Andrew, like, what do you think?
No, I think exactly right. Let's analyze the risk. You have somebody who's got the, law enforcement and legal process involved once. She's done it once. Do you think she might do it again? The answer is yes. People who have done behavior once, unless there's a strong correction, there's something that came back on them, there's some sort of pushback, they're going to just repeat that behavior because that's a learned behavior. Behaviors are something that humans do. I'd never assume that people are going to change. I don't judge. I just say, hey, look, this is the pattern of behavior. I think this pattern of behavior is probably going to repeat. If you've scammed a business partner once, you can say you're not going to do it again as much as you want, but it's still more likely to happen than a guy who hasn't done that.
The other thing to, consider is, I don't know. Okay. Let's say it's your fault. Let's say, I don't know, you threw stuff at her, glass jars, a few knives, a machete. I don't know.
Who called the cops?
Yeah. And she called the cops on you.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Is this something that you're prone to doing in the future? Like, do you have anger management issues? I don't know, dude, but this whole thing reeks of a before the train wreck sort of conversation. The playlist is before the train wreck, and what you're talking about is something that leads right up to a train wreck.
Yeah, so watch Rich's videos is the case, because I'm pretty sure you answered this one.
Scooty Puff Jr.
I take this very personally.
Says lawyers and judges are scum. Bring back frontier justice. So Scooty Puff Jr. has had his say.
Yes. Scum of the earth.
Yeah. But thank you.
But we'll still take your money. That's the end of the day. I'll take your money.
All right. Did you have any other points there?
That was just it wrapping up. That was the presentation I given before. I wanted to make sure I got it out to you guys. And guys, just understand this is very important now, because I think you're going to see more than ever, especially as the economic conditions deteriorate, people getting into cohabitation situations. And then once the economy picks back up, people looking for marriage, people saying, okay, we've been living together in this time of Corona. Let's make it official. Let's tie the knot. Let's take all these steps. So this is something that is more vital now than ever. So you guys really need to be on top of this and make sure you're watching out, because this is a huge risk. And if you have somebody in your life who is thinking about getting married, just try to share the information with them passively. I find that most people are receptive. Like, even people who don't want to be told will just say, hey, watch this video. And maybe if you just forward the video and say, hey, just watch this. Just watch the video. They'll watch the video.
And I've dropped Andrew's channel in the chat there. So you can search for Andrew Esquire on YouTube. He just started up a channel. He's got some great content on it. He doesn't talk about family law that often. He's really just interpreting stuff that's in the news media and distilling it down, just so you can understand it. So I'd encourage you to check that out. We got another super chat here from Resilient Man. He says, why do you hate MRA so much? What's their future?
I didn't say I hate them. I just said they're ineffective. I judge people by the results, right? Because you can only judge people by the outcome. And I'm not judging their philosophy. I don't judge, where things are going. In fact, I'm not even judging where the legal trends are going. I'm just telling you the facts. You can do with those facts what you want. But the fact is, MRAs have been around for the last 20, 30 years, and they've gotten nowhere. They've made no significant legal process. They haven't gone to the Supreme Court effectively. They haven't changed significant state laws. They haven't created. Well, so go ahead. Tell them why.
And I like some of these MRAs, like Paul Elam's a guy.
I'm not saying they're bad people. I never said that.
Yeah. But the problem is that men can't complain about stuff like this. They don't want to hear it, which is why I keep telling people, look, if you want to affect change with family law, it's going to take women getting together, marching on Capitol Hill, and the policymakers and the bureaucrats and saying, family law is bullcrap. It's very hostile towards fathers. They're committing suicide at record rates, blah, 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 all the reasons, and then have them change things. The problem is that when men talk about stuff, or if we express any grievances, we're basically called a bunch of crybabies, and they don't.
Whiners.
Yeah, you're whiners. Shut up, go off. Like, that's just the way that they handle it. So it's not like I have any issue or that I have any distaste for them. It's just they're not particularly effective. So I agree with Andrew on that.
And guys, I'm about using your time efficiently. Let's use your time where it's going to get the most ROI. You know, if the ROI is doing work, do the work, right, Rich? But
correct.
Go ahead and do what you need to do to prevent those risks.
Yeah, like, I don't think that getting together with MRAs and holding up signs and complaining about the landscape is going to solve much.
Right.
I mean, historically, it hasn't done much, unfortunately. But if you understand the game and you can play it better, like, this is kind of what this entire cast is about, what Andrew's talking about, really.
Exactly.
Too, is once you understand the rules to the game, then you can play it better. It's like taking a map, plotting out the landmines and being like, okay, they're here, here, and here. All you have to do is walk around them, and then you can traverse through that landscape. That to me is a better use of your time. That's really what it is, to me. And for those that are asking what MRA stands for, it stands for Men's Rights Activists. There was a documentary done by Cassie J. She called it the Red Pill.
It was mostly the MRA pill.
Yeah, it was really about her interaction with some MRA. So you can go watch that. I think you can rent it on YouTube or a bunch of other platforms. It's out there.
It's on Netflix, I think.
Yeah, is it on Netflix now?
Yeah.
Andrew, it's been a slice, man.
It's been great. Yeah. And like I said, if you guys want to, if you have any suggestions for my channel, I will do, some marriage related ones. If anybody has marriage or children's stuff, or you want child support, I may come and talk about that. Just, shoot me a comment on one of my videos. You can email me, and I'm willing to help you out. But I'm glad I could come today and hopefully educate some people.
Thanks, brother. I'm just going to go full screen for a sec. Just stay there for a minute while I just shout out to the channel sponsor. Just over my shoulder, Grondike Soap Company, tactical soap, beard oil, pheromone-infused sticks, and so on. Let me grab the banner so I can throw it up on the screen if you guys want to grab some of this that helps support the channel. Scott's been a great supporter. Got to go over this way. Boom. Coopersoap.com. It's also pinned in the top comment below. After the show, I'm going live with my community. We're doing the investing broadcast. If you guys are interested in connecting with some like-minded men, pinned in the top comment. You can book for coaching. You can sponsor video requests. You can join my community. It's all down there. Andrew, find Andrew's channel and watch his stuff. He's a good dude, and he presents some very, very useful information. I want to thank you for hopping on. Hopefully we can get together again in the future.
Glad I could be on, Rich.
Thanks, brother. See you guys later.
Take care, everyone.